We're going to switch gears here to another tool in planning, one that many municipalities and counties get involved in, and that's developing oak woodland ordinances. Doug McCreary will be presenting this material. Doug is a natural resource specialist emeritus, which means he's retired, but he loves this stuff so much we still get him back to give talks. Doug, his real expertise is in oak restoration, and he pioneered a lot of the restoration techniques on oaks up at in the Central Sierra, up at our Sierra Foothill Research and Extension Center, where he spent most of his career in California. But he also worked with Ted Swicky to author the part of the book on ordinances and developing oak woodland ordinances. So I'm going to turn it over to Doug, and after Doug, if any other questions come up, go ahead and get those typed into the chat feature. All the presenters will gather around the table. Tom will do it remotely, and we'll have a discussion of some of the points that have come up. So, Doug, it's all yours.
Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here. In preparing for this talk, I thought it would be useful to at least for me, to look at the counties in California that do have ordinances. I didn't go into any kind of great detail, but I thought this would kind of provide an opportunity to see how to use the Oak Management website, which is closely linked with the Hardwood program. This is the homepage for the Oak Management website. I hope most of you are familiar with this and have used it. And if you look up in the upper right on upcoming events, you see that the Planners Guidelines webinar is listed there. If you look over in the left menu, there's a bunch of different topics, and one of them is called Planning in Oak Woodlands. Now, if you click on that menu item, this is the next page which comes up, and it says description of county oak conservation policies. And there were 41 counties that were evaluated. Essentially, the IHRMP, the Integrated Hardwood Range Management Program, contracted with Richard Harris and Susie Coker to contact the counties that had significant amounts of oak woodlands and to find out what their oak policies were. Now, this information was developed a little over a decade ago, so some of it's probably not terribly current, but I think it is still very useful. If you scroll down on this particular page, you can see the list of these 41 counties in alphabetical order, giving the hardwood rangeland the total amount, and listing whether or not they're voluntary guidelines, there's general plan language, or there's implementing ordinances. So just arbitrarily, I clicked on the first two. Here's Alameda County, and you can see that there is a tree ordinance for Alameda County. I also clicked on the next one, which was Amador County, and you can see in the third item down, there isn't a specific ordinance. So this is just kind of some background information. I think it's useful if you are in a particular county and you want to find out what kind of policies are currently on the books, or at least were on the books 10 years ago. This can give you some good insight into what has taken place there. Now, kind of getting back to ordinances, and I guess one of the things I did note in looking through that I believe there were 27 of the 41 counties did have some kind of ordinance. Now, you know, the reasons that ordinances come into being are obviously quite varied. There can be different situations that have happened in different counties, but often they're the result of something that has taken place that's become well known by the county citizens and has struck some kind of a nerve and has caused an impetus for people to start saying we need to do something. There are lots of different reasons: loss or threat of loss of some historic or well-known individual tree. I know that a number of years ago there was a tree down in Southern California called Old Glory, and some of you may have heard about this. I'm not sure how it related to specific policies in that county, but this was a tree that got a lot of attention. There were somebody who sat in the tree for several months. I think Renee Russo, the actress, came out and was giving some kind of lessons under the tree. The guy even had a dentist appointment while he was up in the tree. So this was a tree that really got the public's attention, and there was a clamor for something to be done. Basically, they didn't want the tree to be moved, which eventually happened, and I'm not sure the fate of the tree, but it was a huge tree, and I'm not optimistic. I think that Old Glory is not as glorious as it probably once was. One that I was particularly made aware of, I was actually out of the country on sabbatical, and there was the removal of a lot of large trees along Highway 101 in Santa Barbara County to convert it to a vineyard, to vineyards. And I'm kicking something. Okay. And this got a lot of attention. I read about it in Time magazine. It led Santa Barbara County to engage in a long-term process for developing ordinances related to oak woodlands. There can be removal of oak woodlands from firewood harvest. Certainly when the IHRMP was first started in the mid-'80s, there was a lot of oak removal up in the northern Sacramento Valley in Shasta and Tama County. And people complained to the Board of Forestry. It actually was one of the main reasons that the hardwood program. So, and you can see some of the gold spotted oak or causes counties to get involved and start discussing the idea that maybe we ought to have some rules on the book to address these threats. Well, here's a large tree. This is probably the biggest coast live oak I've ever seen. I'd say a good 7 feet in diameter at the base, 100 feet tall, 100 feet wide. If this tree was located in a place, now this happens to be out kind of in the quite a bit off the road and in some very wildland area. But if a tree like this is well known to community residents and it's threatened, then that certainly will get people's attention. During development, often trees are an essential feature of the landscape that the developers are trying to promote. I'm sure all of you are familiar with how many developments have oak or oak woodland or trees in their name. Unfortunately, the steps taken to protect trees aren't often successful, and as the trees start to die and the values associated with them are lost, people can get very upset, and this can often lead to calls for some type of regulation or local ordinances. This is a place that I used to drive along Highway 70 up in Butte County, and it was a very nice, old, mature blue oak woodland that was converted to prunes, I believe. The firewood harvest I mentioned up in the northern Sacramento Valley, and vineyards, and even things like, this is a picture early on of sudden oak death in Marin County. Well, what types of ordinances are there? I think in the chapter, and there probably are some that are sort of intermediate, I'm sure, but basically many of the ordinances, especially the earlier ones, are heritage tree ordinances. These are ordinances that define a certain size of tree that is sort of protected. And if there is some kind of development that threatens these sizes of trees, then the ordinance kicks in. Now, Tom mentioned, I think it was Tom, that how often these types of things are negotiated, and the mitigation cost went from, I guess maybe it was Greg, went from $175 down to $50. The problem with heritage tree ordinances, obviously, is that they essentially just address the large older trees and do not deal with smaller trees. There can be multiple reasons why this may not be a good idea. Some people have called these large older trees as the living dead or museum trees. They're not trees which are going to be around forever. It's nice to have them, and they can have some very important ecological values, but it doesn't really address long-term sustainability. And so when you're just dealing with the The larger trees, there are some limitations. You're not talking about regeneration. You're not talking about sustainability. Often in these heritage tree ordinances, there are penalties for removing large old trees, but in terms of the ecological values, there may be some kind of mitigation, but really a big, huge tree, there's no type of mitigation that is going to replace that. I mean, if you plant a dozen, large 15-gallon trees, certainly that's a start, but it's going to take several hundred years before any of those trees really provide the same values as large trees. So we'll talk a little more about the heritage tree ordinances in a minute, but in the other type ordinances, and these obviously take a much broader picture. You're looking at a landscape, more of a much larger group of trees, a stand of trees. In these ordinances, natural stands are usually given preference, meaning that what is out there and what exists and what is good is protected. Usually there are provisions for regeneration. In this type of ordinance, probably there would be an assessment to determine if regeneration is taking place successfully, and if it's not taking place successfully, then the type of mitigation would deal with restoring stands that are lost. Often there are components other than oaks are taken into account: shrubs, snags, deadened down material, other landscape features, and as Greg pointed out, that's particularly important. And often the activities that fragment the woodlands are minimized, or at least they attempt to be minimized. So it's looking at a much larger picture, and it doesn't just address one tree or one small group of trees. Just a picture of a pretty big old tree to kind of illustrate heritage tree ordinance, and a picture of more of a wildland area with a number of trees and different features, shrub and mixtures, and all the things that go along with woodland stands. Now, the features of a successful ordinance, these have been around for some time. It seems like there was some impetus in the early 70s to develop ordinances, and I think there's been a long enough time to look and see what makes ordinances successful and what maybe is not so successful in developing an ordinance. One thing that seems consistent with the ordinances that have worked is that there's a high degree of public support. If there's animosity towards the regulatory agencies, and if the people think, oh my gosh, we got another load of government regulation and red tape, and they're making my life miserable and difficult, then it's less likely to be successful. The ordinances that are part of a larger management strategy are often the most successful, and if an ordinance has goals that are clearly stated. Now, obviously, if you had an ordinance that says, well, we want to protect our oak woodlands, that's a pretty nebulous statement, and it can cause both the enforcers and the people who own the property to probably not be comfortable with trying to comply with it because the goals are not clearly stated. Another factor that seems to be associated with successful ordinances are the responsibility and authority are clearly designated. So who's going to enforce the ordinance? Larger than acres have to have an inventory before they can have any impacts to them. You have to have somebody who's going to make sure that that happens and is going to follow up, and that seems to be very important. The ordinances that establish basic performance standards are better, and I think flexibility being built into the ordinance implementation is also another feature. And basically, this just means that these ordinances are not locked in, stone, or that they're not formed and can never be changed. Situations change, as we all know, and that it is important to be able to have some kind of method to change what worked to adopt what works and to discard what doesn't work. So flexibility is also important, and that the enforcement methods and approaches are clearly stipulated. That kind of ties in with the responsibility and authority are clearly designated, but the people that this ordinance is going to apply to want to know how it's going to be affected and what they have to do, and have it fairly clear. Again, just a slide to illustrate that oftentimes, and looking at a broader landscape is more effective. Another feature that I think deserves its own kind of discussion is that ordinances that balance incentives and regulation are usually more effective than ones that are very heavy-handed, just regulatory, just have the stick and no carrot. So it's desirable to link protection requirements with some kind of benefit or incentive. I mean, everybody likes to be rewarded if they think they're doing the right thing. They like to be acknowledged if it's cost them money and it's changed their plans. So there's some different types of ways to do this. Providing tree care assistance or consulting. I know that down in Ventura, not Ventura, where was the Valley Oak Symposium? Visalia used to have a tree person that was paid by the county or the city. I guess it probably was the city at that time. And anyway, they were available to tell people what they should do, to answer questions. People often might have a question. Well, I got a large old tree, but it's got a huge dead branch, and I want to prune it. Is that within the jurisdiction of the ordinance? Is that going to result in any penalties? Providing some kind of financial assistance for enhancing woodlands. I could see that if there were some funds, maybe some mitigation funds that were available for doing some oak restoration or oak regeneration, that could be very valuable for ensuring that the younger generation of oak trees are going to come back also. Sometimes establishing a citizen committee to provide guidance can be good. I know I have served on some oak tree committees that have usually been represented by a wide range of people, from supervisors to arborists to tree cutters to members of the Sierra Club. And I think having committees that bring people together that often have disparate points of view can be very good in encouraging better communication and kind of developing some approaches which are compatible with a wide range of viewpoints. Establishing a recognition program for good stewardship. I know that there are places that that have oak tree person of the year for good stewardship, and these can be really appreciated. Developing educational programs to help public do the right thing. I mean, people generally don't want to trash their resources. They want to maintain. Sometimes there are some conflicts with financial incentives, but developing educational programs, a lot of people do things that aren't right out of ignorance, not out of malice, I would say. And so I think, having some educational materials, the IHRMP has produced a number of pamphlets, and Living Amongst the Oaks is one of the most popular ones, and it has been revised recently, and you can download it for free on the Oak Management website. But I know we have sold a lot of copies of that publication to homeowners groups that provide them at no cost to anybody who's moving into an area that has oak woodlands and they want to know how to manage those trees. I mean, not watering under oak trees is one obvious one, but there can be other things. And bringing together public and private entities for support. Again, this kind of goes back to what I talked about, tree committees and having these groups that may help implement some ordinances can often have some benefits in terms of developing relationships and improving communication. I think this is just an example of people coming together. A lot of times I know these tree groups will go on field trips and will go out and see some oak stands and learn about oak ecology and increase their own understanding, this can only help. So it's definitely a good idea. So in conclusion, a couple of bullet points here. Ordinances that focused on management have a better chance of success. So if you just have, a regulatory do not do this, not as good as if you have some kind of understanding of the fact that oak woodlands are an entity that can often use some human input to facilitate their long-term sustainability. Obviously, planning places where oak regeneration is inadequate is an example of this. Poorly developed and applied ordinances can sometimes do more harm than good. I know I've heard the case mentioned where there was a heritage tree ordinance and it got some pretty strict penalties for removing trees that were a certain age. Well, apparently what happened was as trees started approaching this age, a lot of them were being cut down because people did not want to get into this situation where suddenly their trees are so large that now they're going to have to deal with penalties for removal. So they removed them beforehand. That's a pretty extreme example, but it illustrates the point that not all of our intentions result in actions that we would deem appropriately. It is usually better to develop an ordinance that reflects local concerns. I know that previous speakers have mentioned that you can learn from your neighbors, and counties certainly share information, but there can be a problem if you just have an ordinance and you copy it verbatim and try to apply it to your situation, because situations in different counties are very different. Obviously, in Southern California, development is the major concern, whereas in Northern California, firewood harvesting or vineyard conversion might be the main issues that need to be addressed. So just, it's really good to try to develop ordinances that deal with local circumstances. Successful ordinances often combine enforcement with rewards or incentive. I spent a fair amount of time talking about that. It is important to provide for regular evaluation and revision so new issues quickly addressed. Again, the point that you don't want these things to be rigid and inflexible. You want to have it built in so that things that work can be adopted and things that don't work can be chucked. So I should point out that the main ideas for the chapter in the book are not mine. I'm a biologist. But Ted Zwicky and Elizabeth Bernhardt did have a grant from extensively, says this is back in 1991, but there is from California Department of course, the name has now changed to CAL FIRE, but I believe that document is available. There's also guidelines for developing and evaluating tree ordinances that is listed on the International Society of Arboriculture, and you can see the web address there. And I looked up, and Dr. Swickies and Bernhard also have their consulting firm, Phytosphere Research, and you can see the address for them. And there's a lot of good information about ordinances on there, so I would suggest that you maybe go look at that website also. So that's it. I guess
Great, yeah, thanks, Doug. Once again, as a reminder, all the references Doug put up and Tom and Greg also had some listed will get posted as a link on the reference section of the website for this webinar. So if you didn't get them all jotted down, you will be able to go back and look at them on the website afterwards. And the entire session, once again, the recordings will be available. Well, just Tom,